So in this video, I'm going to walk through how I would go about creating the flange mount step by step. Now, I'm not saying the way I'm doing it is the right way or the only way. I'm just going to share what kind of goes through my head, what I'm thinking about, and why I do the things the way I do. And hopefully you'll learn some tips and tricks along the way. So let's dive right in. So in this video, I'm going to show how I would go about modeling this 3D model from a drawing. And I'm going to be referencing this drawing that you see here. And typically what I do is I try and break it down into its simplest form. So we can kind of see that there's like this cylindrical shape here. Underneath that, there's like this rectangular shape. Then we have this kind of this weird looking arm that we're going to have to deal with. On top of that, there's like this rib feature. But then we can kind of see that this arm looks like it's symmetrical. Looks like there's one on the other side. So we're probably going to go ahead and mirror that. So again, I kind of break it down into its simplest form. So starting with the cylindrical shape, it kind of makes sense to do it as a revolved feature because we have a lot of like the diameter dimensions on here, overall heights like 1 and 3 and 23, etc. I'm going to start by just drawing a simple profile. In fact, I'm probably going to leave off this little extra shape that you see here because that's part of this rectangular shape. So I'm going to start with a simple revolved profile that you see here. So let's start with a new design. I'll verify that we're in millimeters, which we are. I'll create a new component. Let's just call it flange mount. And I'll draw a profile on the front plane. Now I like to start with a center line from 0, 0. So I'm just going to draw a quick center line like so. And then I can draw my basic profile shape that I was kind of showing you on that drawing. So again, I'm just going to kind of mock it up. So kind of here's the basic shape. I might move that over a little bit. This line isn't horizontal, so I'll come in here, click on horizontal vertical, and force that line to be horizontal. I also like to make sure that something is referenced to 0, 0. So for example, I might want the bottom of the cylinder to be referenced. So I'm going to click on that point there and that point there. And because my horizontal vertical constraint was selected, we just said that that point has to be horizontally aligned. Now I can use the dimensions from the drawing. So we can see, for example, this is a diameter of 68, this is a diameter of 28, etc. I'll go ahead and start to dimension this. And you'll see why I created this center line, because if I do a dimension and I start by clicking on the center line, and then I click on this line here, you'll see that it's going to do a diameter dimension for me. And I can type in 68, and it's going to automatically scale my sketch for me, and it created a 68 diameter dimension. Then I can go ahead and add in, for example, this is the 28. So I'll say 28, and my sketch is going to update. So I'm just going to continue adding these dimensions. Now, I messed up. I'm supposed to start with my center line and then go to my object line. So center line, object line, and then it'll do the diameter dimension for me. So that's 42. So now I can start adding my height dimensions. So that's supposed to be 23. This is supposed to be 1. Okay, so I've now added in all of my dimensions. You can see them here. All of the lines are black. One of the things I typically do is expand open my component and expand open my sketches, and you'll notice that my sketch does not have a lock symbol next to it. And I showed this in one of my previous videos. It looks like everything is fully constrained. I physically can't move any of my object lines, so why is my sketch not saying that it's fully constrained? Well, if I click on the auto constrain, you'll notice it added a dimension to my center line. So because we're referencing the center line with some of these dimensions, it also needs to be fully dimensioned. So it's just adding a 41.38. I could go ahead and say okay, and let's just make that like an even 40. It doesn't really matter what that dimension is. It just has to be dimensioned. And now you'll notice that my sketch is fully constrained, which is what we want to aim for. Okay, I'll go ahead and finish my sketch. We'll click on the revolve command, and because I had created a center line, the revolve command automatically selects that as the axis, and I can just say OK. And we've now created our cylindrical shape. So we've basically created the first major feature. We'll come back and do the slots a little bit later, but we've created this cylindrical shape. So I would say the next biggest thing is the rectangular shape. So that's what we're going to work on next, and that's kind of featured in this view here. We can see that it's like 90 by 60. There's also a kind of a larger circle in here that we're going to reference, which is dimensioned in this view right here. It's 80. So I'm going to go ahead and create a sketch on this bottom face. And I think I'll actually start with that 80 diameter circle. And then I will create a center rectangle according to those dimensions. So 90 by 60. And again, I used a center rectangle. And now you can kind of see why I try and create everything kind of centered at 0, 0. I keep my sketches as simple as possible. And I'm going to select these profiles and extrude them the correct distance. According to the drawing, they need to be 7 millimeters. So we can kind of see right here, that flange is 7 millimeters tall. So I'm going to select the profiles that I want. I'll say extrude, start to drag the direction that I want them to go. And I can see that's in a negative direction, so I'm going to say -7. And I've now just added that rectangular profile to my body. And also I can see that that sketch that I created was fully constrained, right? Because we created it at 0, 0, I dimensioned it, everything is fully constrained. Again, that's kind of the aim that we want. Looking at the drawing, I would say that kind of the next major thing are like the holes and the fillets. Now, one of the tricks I like to use is I like to create the fillets first to locate these holes. And this is one of the discussions that I kind of goes through my head, and you'll see this here in just a minute. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. But I'm going to go ahead and fillet these edges. They're a radius of 8, so I'm just going to select one, type in 8, and then I can hold down my control key and select these other edges and say OK. Now I want to create the 4 holes. And we can see that they're a diameter of 6 and a quantity of 4. I like to use the hole command. Okay, and the reason for this is because when I go to create a drawing, the drawing will automatically recognize the holes and dimension the holes and label what they are. Are they a counterbore hole? Are they threaded, etc.? If I just drew a circle on a sketch and punched that through, or extrude cut that through, I would have to label those in my drawing. So I like to use the hole command. Now, here is the reason I filleted the corners first, because now when I click on this face and I drag this around, you'll see this little point right there, that little white point. That is the center of this radius right here. Okay, so I don't even have to, locate where this hole is. I want this hole to always be at the center of this radius. Now the diameter is supposed to be 6, so I'll go ahead and say OK, and you'll see that it created that hole. Now I need to edit that because I want it to go all the way through, but I'm just making a point here why I filleted the corner first. Now, here's the drawback. So I'm going to change that to all. So here's the drawback with this method. I now have to do the whole command again and click over here, drag it to this point, change that to all, rinse and repeat. I have to do that again over here and then again over here, and I'll have 4 whole features in my timeline. Okay, that's fine. Some people are like, well, you shouldn't have 4 whole features. You should do it as a sketch instead. So here's the other method. So I undid it. I don't have any holes. I could go ahead and create a sketch on this face. I'll go ahead and project this face. And I'll make sure my selection filter is set to specified entities. And I'm just going to click on that face and say OK. And you'll see that it projected that face. And you'll see these 4 points that were projected, the center of those radiuses. Now, when I do the whole command, there's an option that says at single point or from sketch. So I'm going to say from sketch. I'll click on that point and I'll say all. Make sure I'm 6 millimeter diameter. And now I can just click the 4 points. And so this, I would say, is probably the preferred method. Yes, it's an extra step. I had to create a sketch and then create the whole command. But I would say that's probably the preferred method. Now, with that said, as you look at the drawing, you can see the circles are dimensioned 44 millimeters apart from each other and 74 millimeters apart from each other. So some of you might say, those holes are dimensioned with actual distances. So we shouldn't assume that these circles are always at the center of these radiuses. They should be dimensioned on a sketch. Again, that is something that you would have to decide. I'm making the assumption that they are always on the radius. That's how I would want them to be. I would say the next major feature on this rectangular thing is maybe these recesses in here, which are kind of hard to see in this isometric view, but we can see that they're dimensioned right here, a radius of 5, an angle of 30. So let's go ahead and create those. So I'm going to create a sketch on this bottom face, project that face, and then I'm going to create some geometry that's catching to the existing geometry. I also need to project the cylinder, this cylindrical face, so I'm going to project that edge or that face, and now we can kind of see how we now have that edge there. One of the cool tricks is if using the line command, if I click and hold, it's going to create a tangent line for me on that circle. And then all I have to do is get near this other projected circle like so, and it's going to snap to that. I'll do the same thing here, click and hold, it's going to be tangent. I'm just going to get near this circular edge and let go. Then I'm going to dimension the angle that we need that to be. So angled line, horizontal line, that needs to be an angle of 30. I'll do the same thing here. Now I'm placing my dimension. I could type in 30, but I'm going to go ahead and click on that dimension, and it's going to reference that dimension. So instead of having to type in 30 again, it's going to reference it. So if I ever wanted to change this to be like 35, that's going to change to 35 also. And I don't have to change 2 dimensions. I only have to change 1 dimension. So I'm going to change that back to 30. That changes back to 30. So now we have this particular shape right here. And we can see that this sketch is fully constrained. So I'll say finish sketch. We'll extrude this particular profile. We'll cut up, and according to the drawing, I need to go -2 millimeters. And we've now created that particular indentation. Again, looking at the drawing, it has a radius of 5 on these edges. So I'm going to say fillet, radius of 5. I'll select that edge also. Now I need it over here, so I'll use the mirror command. So instead of creating a complex sketch on both sides and having to do a bunch of dimensions, I'm just going to do it on one side. What are the objects? I'm going to make sure it's set to features, and then I'm going to select the extrude and the fillet feature. Select my mirror plane, and then I can just select this mid plane because everything is centered around 0, 0. I can do that mid plane and say OK, and we get that mirrored to the other side. We've got quite a bit done. We should probably save our design. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and I'll call this, flange mount. Taking a look at the drawing, I would say the next major thing with this area is probably the slot features. So looking at this, we can see they're on a 58 diameter centerline circle. They are a diameter of 8 and 30 degrees apart from each other. So let's go ahead and create a sketch on the top face. Now, I personally like to create multiple sketches, and you can kind of see that in my timeline. Instead of having complex sketches at the very beginning that kind of define the whole thing, I like to break my design down into smaller chunks. So, for example, I'll have a sketch just for the slot features. I'll have a sketch just for the rectangular feature, etc. Could I have less sketches? Absolutely. Could I have even more sketches? Absolutely. I just find breaking it down into manageable chunks is easier to understand and easier to follow. Okay, so I'm going to create a circle, and I'm just going to make it a construction circle because we're going to kind of reference this for where the slots are going to go. And this is the 58 diameter circle. So I'll type in 58. Then I'm going to use the slot center point arc slot. So I'm going to specify my center point. I'll specify an arc point and then some other point like so. Now I could type in the degrees because I know it needs to be 30 degrees, but I'm going to purposely not because I want to fully constrain this. So I'm going to just click like so, and then click again without typing anything in. And the reason for that is I like to come in and add in dimensions. So for example, I'm going to click here and change this to diameter. I'll move this off to the side, and we know that that needs to be a 8 for the diameter. Now I'm going to add in some construction geometry from that point there to here and to that point there. We can throw in our dimension of 30 degrees. And now we can kind of see how our slot has changed size a little bit. But I want it to be perfectly vertical. So what I'm going to do is create another construction line from this point here. And then as I hover over the center line, you can see it snap to the midpoint of this arced line right here. So I'm going to move until you see it snap to that midpoint. And then we can force that line to be vertical. And we've now made this arc be perfectly at the 12 o'clock position. I can look at my sketch and see that it's fully constrained. And so I'm done. Now, some of you might be like, well, go ahead and create your circular pattern. You could in your sketch, but I would recommend that you keep your sketch as simple as possible and do your pattern in 3D. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to say finish sketch. I'll go ahead and select the profile, extrude, start my extrusion. How far? I'm going to say to object. I could say all, because there's nothing in the way. It could extrude all the way through. But I also need to think, would there ever potentially be something in the way? Like, do we add a flange or something like that down the road? So I know that typically I only want to mill to this face right here. So I'm going to say to object and click that face, and it's going to extrude down to that face. I'll say OK, and there is our result. We'll come in here and say create pattern, circular pattern. Again, make sure your object type is set to features. What's the feature? It's the extrude feature. So instead of having, if this was set to faces, I would have to come in here and select that face, that face, that face, and that face. And yes, that would work. But I think it's so much easier to say pattern this extrude feature. What's the axis? Now this is where, this is my opinion, and I would love to have you comment on this because I don't know what the right answer here is. I personally select a cylindrical face. Now I could also select this axis, but in my mind I'm like, what if this part ever moves away from this axis somehow, right? So you know, this face can't move away. So I typically always select a cylindrical axis. That's just me. But I could have also selected this z-axis. We'll go ahead and specify the number of slots that we want. In this case, it's quantity of 6, and I will say OK. And we now have 6 of these slots. And if we go back to our sketch, you'll notice our sketch is very, very simple. If I came in here and did a circular pattern, I would have to, select these objects. What's the center point? And then I do 6 here. I'll say OK. I mean, it's not bad or whatever, but I just find that keeping your sketch as simple as possible, you can kind of see here's the dimension, and that's pretty much it, right? And then you have your pattern here. It's so much easier to see the pattern in the timeline and say, instead of 6, we want 4. Instead of trying to figure out which sketch are these slots in. Are they in this sketch? Are they in this sketch? Are they in this sketch? It's very easy to see the pattern feature in the timeline. So again, personal preference. So we have pretty much finished the cylindrical shape and the rectangular shape and even the recesses in the rectangular shape. So I would say the next thing we should attack is this arm. Now, because of this indentation here, that causes a little bit of issue. And then also you'll notice that there's this radius of 108 and this radius of 90. So there's these curves right here that we have to kind of basically machine all this area away. So as I'm looking at this, it's almost like we need to create a big chunk of material in the shape of this arm and then come back and machine a majority of it away. And I kind of, as I'm looking at this, that's kind of like, how would this part be manufactured? You would probably start, this is actually probably a cast part, but let's just say it was made out of a big chunk of aluminum. You would have to come in and machine from a large piece of aluminum. You'd have to machine that area away. So that's how I would probably approach this for modeling it. We can take a look at this profile here. I'm going to probably just draw this particular shape. Again, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm not going to add in these fillets or radiuses until the very end, probably. So I'm just going to, draw some very basic straight lines. The slots kind of define the overall shape, so I'm going to start with that. So I'm going to start with a sketch on, let's do on the front plane. Again, I like to project geometry. Now, because this is cylindrical geometry, watch what happens when it's set to specified entities. If I were to project that face and then turn off the body, you'll notice it didn't project like this vertical edge. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to say project. but this time I'm going to change it to bodies, and I'm going to click on that. And now you'll notice it projected almost like a silhouette. So sometimes it makes sense to project the body, and now we get this edge that we can see here. Then I'm going to create these slots, and I'm going to just use center to center slot and kind of just draw them off to the side over here. And I'll create another slot right on top of that. Again, just using the drawing, one was 8 and one was 20. I'll move these around so you can kind of see that a little bit better. I might move these down just a little bit. Again, I'm just kind of drawing where I think they're going to be. Now I'm going to draw a horizontal line and an angular line that just touches that. Same thing here to make it tangent. Then we'll come in and dimension those. So I'm just going to go here and then just touching that edge. And then same thing, I'll just draw a line. And then I'm going to move my cursor until I see that tangent icon. I don't know if you can kind of see that right there. I'm going to go ahead and click, and it created that tangent icon for me automatically, that tangent constraint. So I just kind of mocked up the overall shape. Now I'm going to use the dimensions. So we can kind of see, the bottom of this slot is 22 from the top of this rib, which we don't have created yet, but we can see that that is 3 millimeters down from the top. So this will be 25 down from the top. And then we can see that we have a diameter dimension that we're going to have to create. So I'm going to create a center line again, like so. Now, we already know it probably needs to be dimensioned, so I'm just going to go ahead and dimension it for now, just some random number. We know that this dimension needs to be 25. Okay. And then I can specify this to here, and that needs to be 150. Okay. Then we can start, again, I'm using the drawing just to dimension some of these lines. So I'm just referencing my drawing here. So that's 108 from here to here. Oh, I was pretty close, 108. Same thing from here to here is 108. Now, here's a trick. I could type in 108, or I could, instead of using a dimension, I could use a constraint saying, for example, that these 2 points have to stay, I need to move them first. They have to stay vertical with each other, like so. So if this dimension changes, that point has to change also. Okay, I'll keep dimensioning. This needs to be 3. I can see that, those features all turn black, which is good. Now I need to specify, for example, the angle from here to here needs to be 15. And this distance needs to be 5. Okay. And as I look at my sketch, I can see that that is fully constrained. So I'll go ahead and finish my sketch. And I now have this profile. Now here's where things are going to get interesting. I'm going to say extrude. And you'll notice as I extrude, it's not going to wrap around. And we're going to answer that question here in a little bit. I also need it to extrude symmetrically in both directions. And I want it to go to a very specific point. So you'll notice symmetric doesn't let me go to an object. So I'm going to change from symmetric to 2 sides. And 2 sides does let me go to an object. And I want to pick that point there and that point there, which is basically symmetric. But I need to say to object and then go to that point and go to that point and say, okay. And if I expand open my bodies, I now have 2 separate bodies. but I want to connect these two together. So now I'm going to select this face and say extrude. And again, instead of distance, I'm going to say to object. I'll click that cylindrical face. You're going to see it's going to grow, and the operation is set to join. If I say OK, we're now back to one body, and it's joined to that original body. We've created this weird shape and connected it back. Now I'm going to finish the kind of the design. So I'll select that and say this is a radius of 5. And these two edges are a radius of 10. So instead of doing these two as a separate fillet, I like to use the fillet selection set. So I'm going to click on this little plus, and I can select these two other edges and say those are a radius of 10. So you can see it did one edge of 5 and these two edges of 10. And when I say OK, it's one fillet feature in the timeline. But because they're kind of all together, that's why I like to do them as a selection set as one fillet feature. Okay, so we now have kind of this big chunk of material. Now we want to start machining away the areas that we don't want. So I'm going to use 3-point arcs to create these two arcs in here. So once again, I'll create a sketch on that top flat face. I'll project. Again, I'm going to project the whole body for now. Instead of having to select which faces I want, I pretty much just want the overall profile. And then using information from the drawing, we can kind of see that this arc ends right here, which is like 71 millimeters from the center. And then this arc ends about 28 millimeters over. So I'm going to be referencing those dimensions. Also, I'm going to be creating kind of the shape of the arm right here using some of these dimensions. So I'm just going to start by creating a couple quick lines over here that we will then dimension. So that one needs to be 71, and this one needs to be 28. And those need to be 14 and 48. Okay, so now I'm ready to create the 3-point arc. So I'm going to go from here to here, and then I'm just going to go ahead and click, and then I'm going to do the same thing from here to here. I'm just going to place the arc. Then I can come in and add in my dimension, and it's going to allow me to specify the radius. So for that radius, that's going to be 90. You can kind of see how that smoothed that out a little bit. And for this radius here, that's going to be 108. We can see how that changed a little bit also. Okay, so I now have the areas that I want to remove. So then I can just come in here and select these profiles, say extrude, and if I say all, you'll notice that it only extrudes in one direction, right? Because it's extruding all the way in one direction. So I need to change this to 2 sides and specify a distance in the other direction. And instead of a distance, I might just say I could say to object and specify like that top face, for example, and just say OK. And we've now cut all of that material away. Then looking at the drawing, we can see that there's radius 10 fillets kind of all the way around. So I'll go ahead and add those in really quick. So I'll say fillet, radius of 10. We'll add that in there, add that in there. And we can now see what that looks like. That looks great. We have this rib, and we can see that it is located 48 millimeters to the arm, and then an extra 7 millimeters to where that starts, and then it's 5 millimeters thick. So we're going to use a cool command. We're going to use the rib command to create this. And here is kind of the side profile shape of it. And so that's what we're going to create. But we need to create our sketch at this location right here. So what I'm going to do is create an offset plane from this front face, and we need to go in this direction, which we can see is in a minus direction. So I'm going to say minus 48, and then we need to go that extra 7 millimeters. So I'm going to say minus 7 millimeters, so you can see it moved just a little bit further, and I'll say okay. And so now this plane is right here. So we went minus 48 to right here, then we went another minus 7 millimeters to right there. Now we can create this particular profile shape. Again, I'll use the dimensions from the drawings. So I'll say create a sketch on that. We'll project. Again, I'll probably project the part because it's cylindrical. I'll just kind of mock up what the overall shape's going to look like. Kind of angles down like so. And then kind of comes down. I don't want to make sure I catch to a center point. You can kind of see how it looks like it's trying to catch to a midpoint right there. I don't want it to do that because I want it to be able to move. So I'm going to actually go to something like that and then change my line to vertical. And that's a very valid thing that could potentially happen to you as you're designing, where you go to click and it tries to snap to a midpoint or something like that, and then it doesn't let you change it down the road. That's exactly why. So just be aware of that as you're creating your sketches. Once again, this is referencing a center line. So I'm going to draw in my center line. I know to dimension it. So I'm just going to say 33. Again, doesn't matter what that dimension is. But now I can reference that and that point there. And that needs to be 130. And this point and this point needs to be, according to the drawing, 166. There we go. And then, just like before, according to the drawing, we know that the height of this rib from that slot is supposed to be 22. And then this angle is supposed to be 15. I look at my sketch. I can see that it's locked and fully constrained. In fact, you can see all of my sketches are fully constrained, which is great. Again, looking at the drawing, we can see, it's got a radius on there. There's a hole in there. I'm keeping my sketch as simple as possible, and I'm going to let Fusion do the hard work, okay? Also notice that my edge is not touching the cylinder, and that is because our plane is farther from the center of this cylinder. It's farther back. But this is where the magic of the rib command comes into play. So I'm going to say rib. What's my profile? I'm just going to click on this edge right here, and you can see that it's going to extend to the next boundary. Okay, now this was already filled in because I practiced this earlier. If I had 5 millimeters, it's going to be on the wrong side. So I need to type in minus 5 millimeters to make it go onto the correct side. So just keep that in mind. So that's how you'll notice it says flip direction. That does not flip which side. If I say flip direction, you actually see it's going to flip the direction of the rib to the other side of the line. So to change which side, you have to change a positive or negative number. So I'll go ahead and say okay, and it uses just that simple line to create this rib. It extends it and wraps it around for us automatically. I'll go ahead and fill it that to be the radius of 5. Same thing, I'm going to add in a selection set, click on that guy, and that's a radius of 30. And so filleting this rib, it's only one feature, but it's doing both of those fillets. To do the whole, again, I like to use the whole command. I'll click somewhere on the face, kind of move it where I want it to be, specify the size, which in this case it's 3 millimeters. And looking at the drawing, I need to reference that edge there. It's 8 millimeters from that edge, and it's 7 millimeters up from basically this surface or this edge. So it's 7 millimeters up from that edge. So I'm referencing basically this flat face here and this flat face here. And we'll say go all the way through a 3 millimeter drilled through hole. Okay, so we have spent some time creating this arm like so, and we now have this rib. We want to put it on the other side. So I'll come in here and say mirror. Now it says features. Well, we have quite a few features, and I don't even remember where they are. So I'm actually going to cancel out. And one of the tricks you can do is basically, drag your timeline back. So here's the pattern of the slots, right? And then if I just step forward, I'm like, okay, so there's the extrude where we started to create that arm. So pretty much it's right after this pattern, right? I pretty much need to select everything after that pattern to mirror. So I'm going to say mirror, features. What are my features? I'm going to select, well, I can't pick that sketch, so I'm going to select that extrude. I'm going to hold down my shift key, and I'm going to select that hole, and it's going to select everything that it can. So you'll notice it's not selecting the sketches or the offset planes or anything like that. It's selecting the features like extrusions and fillets and stuff like that. What's my mirror plane? It's going to be this plane here. And then for the compute type, we have different compute types: optimized, identical, or adjust. Now, by default, it's typically set to adjust. And this happens quite often. If I hit OK, you'll notice that it errors out. And I don't know why it does that. It's not happy with something mirroring it across. So what I would do is rerun this and pick one of the other options. So extrude to the hole, and instead of adjust, I'm going to say identical. What's my mirror plane? That's my mirror plane. I'll say OK, and that worked. However, I noticed that it did not mirror over the fillets, and so that is probably why it failed on the original one. So it did 99.5% of it. So I will have to come in and re-add in those. So if I click on that fillet, I can see that's a radius of 10. So I'll just go ahead and fillet that to be 10 and that to be 10. And now we have the mirrored features on the other side. And that's pretty much it. So if I take a look at the drawing, we've now mirrored that to the other side. And if we look at the general notes, you'll notice it says small radiuses are 0.75, small chamfers are radius of 1. And there's a small chamfer on the top and on the inside. And then kind of looking at this, you can see that there's small radiuses all the way around. So let's just finish that up really quick. So I'll pick on this edge, say chamfer, that's a radius of, or a distance of 1, I'll say OK. And then we need to do fillets. And here's a cool little trick. I'm going to click on the fillet command. And if I click on a face like so and type in 0.75, it's going to select all of the edges that are on those faces. You can see how it selected all of those. Now, if I were to hold down my control key and select on this face, you can see how it adds in all of those, but it also added in the edge for the hole, and I can't unfortunately unselect that. So there isn't a way to do that. So I want to unselect that face and maybe instead select that edge chain, and you can see how it added that in there. I could add in that edge chain. If I were to, click on this, it's going to add in that edge chain. And so I can just kind of work my way around and, pick on faces to grab a majority of them, but then I can just grab edge chains to add in the rest. So very quickly, I can add in a bunch of edges without having to select multiple edges. Now you'll notice this one looks kind of weird where it kind of tapers out. So I need to add in, it looks like that edge chain there. That looks good there. That looks good there. It looks like I need to add in that edge chain and that edge chain there. And there we go. So that is it. That's how I go about modeling a semi-complex model like this. If you've lasted this long, I'm going to throw in some bonus tips here at the end. One of the things that I typically do that I forgot to show earlier in the video is as I'm going through, like for example, when I was creating this rectangle here and we created the indentations, I might verify that everything works correctly. So for example, this width and height, if I were to come in and turn on my sketch and then say, for example, show dimension, I can come in here and change this dimension, say like 65, and we could see that the width updated. I could change this from like 90 to 95, and we can see that these indentations are updating as expected. Let me go ahead and undo and jump to the very end of our timeline, and let's make those changes and see if everything works correctly. So I'll say 65, and sure enough, we can see that it looks like everything is updating accordingly. We'll say 95, and we can see that that rectangle updated, the holes still stay centered, our arms look good. So I'll verify that my model is behaving the way I expected it to. One of the other things that I might do is, remember when we worked on the arm, there was quite a few features that had to do with the arm. So for example, all of these features deal with the arm. Well, if you select all of them, you can right mouse click and say create group. And you'll notice now my timeline looks a little bit shorter and all of these features are in this group. And you can even rename that group. So I could call this, arm, for example. And if I hover over this, we can see that that group is called arm. You can also rename any of your sketches. So right now you can see it just says sketch 2. I could rename this to, rectangle shape or whatever. I could rename this one to, cylinder profile. And it just allows you to, as you're going through your timeline, you can see, okay, this is the rectangular shape sketch. This one defines the slot. So I'll go ahead and rename this one and rename that, slot profile. And that way it's just easier to kind of figure out which of these sketches define what. So hopefully you learned something new watching this video. Again, this is what goes through my head as I'm modeling a part like this. If you have different ideas or different methods on how you would have modeled this, please post them in the comments in the video. That way others can learn from you also. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next video. I hope you learned something new and enjoyed that video. If you did, make sure you like and subscribe to be notified of upcoming videos. If you need help learning Fusion, visit my webpage at cadedllc.com. And as always, have fun learning Fusion.